My husband proposed to me on a Tuesday. We buried him on a Tuesday. And for 25 years of marriage, every single Friday at 3:30 p.m., he left the house with his leather folio under his arm and said the same 6 words. Client meeting, darling. Back by 6. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Jonathan was a partner at the firm. Dedication was his brand, his mask, his beautifully crafted lie. The call came on a Wednesday. I was in the garden, my hands deep in the soil, trying to remember how to make things grow. The police officer's voice was a monotone of practiced sympathy. A car accident on the I-5. Instantaneous. They needed me to come identify him. I didn't cry then either. In the cold, sterile room, looking at the shell of the man I'd shared a life with, I felt a terrifying numbness. It wasn't grief, it was the quiet before the avalanche. If a story like mine has ever made you pause, if you've ever felt that cold whisper that something isn't right, subscribe to this channel. Stay with me. You're not alone, and sometimes hearing another woman's truth is the first step to uncovering your own. 3 days after the funeral, my daughter, Chloe, flew in from Boston. She was all sharp angles and smudged eyeliner, my fierce, grieving girl. We moved through the cavernous house like ghosts, sorting through the physical remnants of Jonathan Pierce, bespoke suits, golf trophies, a collection of vintage watches worth more than my first house. We need to find his will, Mom, Chloe said, her voice hoarse. And the life insurance documents, anything financial. The firm's HR said they'd be in his home office. His home office, a room I rarely entered. It was his sanctuary, all dark wood and the smell of old paper and expensive cologne. The large mahogany desk sat like a monument. Chloe started with the filing cabinets, her movements efficient. I simply stood, feeling like an intruder. Mom, Chloe's voice changed. She was holding a slim, gray safe deposit box key. No bank logo, just a number etched in the metal, 712. Did you know about this? I took the cool metal from her. No, I've never seen it. We searched the desk. No paperwork for a box, no bank book, just the key sitting in a small compartment of his desk organizer, hidden in plain sight. My heart began a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. It was the first crack in the pristine facade of our life. Maybe it's for the firm, Chloe offered, but her eyes were wary. On a key with no identification, unlikely. I closed my fist around it. The metal bit into my palm. We need to find the bank. It took a week. We called every bank in the city describing the key. Nothing. It was Chloe who thought of it. What about that old commercial bank downtown, the one that looks like a Greek temple? Grand Coast Trust. He always loved that building, said it had gravitas. I called. The manager, a man named Mr. Albright with a voice like gravel, confirmed it after I provided Jonathan's full name, social security number, and our address. Yes, Mrs. Pierce, box 712. I am sorry for your loss. Your husband was a long-standing client. He paused. You are listed as a cosigner. You may access it any time during business hours. I made the appointment for Friday at 3:30 p.m. A sick, poetic symmetry. The Grand Coast Trust building was all marble and echoing silence. Mr. Albright, a man in his 60s with impeccable manners and distant eyes, led me through a gated corridor to the vault. The air was cold and still. He inserted his key, then gestured for mine. I handed him the little gray key. The lock turned with a solid clunk. He slid the long, narrow metal box out and placed it in my hands. It was heavier than it looked. The privacy room is just there, he said, pointing to a small alcove with a table and a single chair. Take all the time you need. The door clicked shut behind me. I was alone with a box of my husband's secrets. For a moment, I just held the weight of it. Then I set it on the table and lifted the lid. The top layer was cash. neat, brick-like bundles of $100 bills bound with paper bands. I didn't touch them, but my eyes scanned the amounts scribbled on the bands. $10,000, $10,000, $10,000. I counted 12 bundles, $120,000 in cash. My breath hitched. Why? Beneath the money were folders. The first was labeled The Sea Cliff Residence. I opened it. Deeds, property tax records, utility bills. For a house in Sea Cliff, an exclusive wooded neighborhood north of the city with breathtaking ocean views. The deed was in Jonathan's name alone, purchased 7 years ago. The mortgage statements showed a balance of $1.2 million. The utility bills were current. Someone was living there. My hands began to shake. I set that folder aside. The next was simply labeled M. Inside were photographs. A woman. She was maybe 40, with a warm, laughing smile and intelligent eyes. In some photos, she was in a garden. In others, she was curled on a sofa I didn't recognize, reading a book. There was a familiarity to her presence, a comfort in her presence that made my stomach churn. And there were pictures of a boy, a young man, really. He had Jonathan's chin, his way of standing with his hands in his pockets. He looked about 16 in the most recent photo. He had my husband's eyes. The world narrowed to the pinprick of light reflecting off the glossy photograph. The silence in the little room became a roar. I heard the echo of his words. "Client meeting, darling, back by 6. The third folder contained financial statements, a separate investment account I'd never seen, funded with regular, substantial transfers from our joint account, transfers I'd signed off on for tax-efficient investment restructuring. The balance was just over $800,000. Another account, in the name of Miranda Vale, received automatic monthly deposits of $8,500 for the past 7 years. The math was a physical blow. Over $700,000. My money. At the very bottom of the box lay a single, sealed envelope. My name, Catherine, written in Jonathan's elegant, looping script. I didn't open it. Not then. I carefully placed everything back in the box, in its exact order. I closed the lid. I walked out, the box in my arms. Mr. Albright was at his desk. "Did you find everything in order, Mrs. Pierce?" I looked at him, this man who had guarded my husband's secret life for years. "I need a complete record of all access to this box for the past 7 years, dates and times." His polite mask faltered. "That is highly unusual. The privacy of our clients—" "I am a co-signer on that box, Mr. Albright. My husband is dead, and I believe the contents may be part of an active estate issue. If you'd prefer, my lawyer can contact you with a subpoena. Her name is Eleanor Vance." I'd never heard of Eleanor Vance, but the name sounded formidable. He paled slightly. "That won't be necessary. I'll have the log for you by Monday." "Thank you." I drove home, my mind a blank, white static. I parked in the driveway of the house Jonathan and I built, the house that was now just a beautiful shell. I walked inside, placed the safe deposit box on the kitchen island, and only then did I allow myself to scream. It was a raw, silent scream that tore at my throat, my hands braced against the cold marble. The betrayal was so vast, so meticulously planned, it felt less like an emotion and more like a new, permanent geography of my soul. Chloe found me there an hour later. I hadn't moved. I showed her. I laid out the evidence of her father's second life on the vast island. The cash, the deeds, the photos of the woman, Miranda Vale, and the boy, the financial statements. She picked up a photo of the boy, her half-brother. Her face, already pale from grief, went ashen. No, this is some mistake. This is a client's family, something for work. The deeds are in his name, Chloe. The money came from our account, our joint account. My voice was frighteningly calm. That's 364 Fridays of lies, 364 client meetings. She sank onto a stool, the photo fluttering from her fingers. How could he? How could he do this to you, to us? Her anger was a swift, hot flame next to my ice. Who is this woman? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. That was my minor revenge, that small turn. It wasn't dramatic. It was a simple, deliberate action. On Monday, I went back to Grand Coast Trust. Mr. Albright handed me a printed log. Jonathan had accessed the box almost every Friday afternoon between 4 and 4:30 p.m., but there were other entries, a second access code, a name, Miranda Vale. She visited every Tuesday morning. I hired Eleanor Vance that afternoon. She was in her 50s with a sleek black bob and eyes that missed nothing. In her sleek, minimalist office, I spread out my curated evidence. She listened, her steepled fingers pressed to her lips. "Catherine," she said finally, "this is bigamy for all intents and purposes, minus the second marriage certificate. He maintained 2 separate households funded by communal marital assets without your knowledge or consent. This is financial fraud on a grand scale. The hidden assets, the diversion of funds, it's a civil and potentially criminal matter." "The boy," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "He's 16. He's a child." Eleanor's gaze softened a fraction. "He is also a legal heir. This complicates the estate significantly. We need to move fast. We need to secure the marital assets, what's left of them, and we need to confront this situation." "I want to see the house," I said. Eleanor advised against it. Chloe begged me not to go, but I had to. I had to see the physical space of the lie. On a bright, cruel Tuesday morning, knowing Miranda Vale would be at the bank according to the access log, I drove to Seacliff. The house was stunning, a modern masterpiece of glass and cedar perched on the cliff's edge, all sweeping ocean views. It was smaller than our home, but infinitely more tasteful. It looked lived in, loved. Hanging baskets of fuchsias exploded with color by the front door. A child's bicycle, no, a teenager's mountain bike, was leaned against the side of the garage. My chest ached with grief I had no right to. I didn't get out of my car. I just sat there, watching the morning light glint off the windows. This was where he came to be happy. This was his real life. I was the client meeting. I was the obligation. The thought was a knife, twisted. As I sat there, a silver sedan pulled into the driveway. A woman got out. Miranda Vale. She was more beautiful in person, with an easy, graceful way of moving. She carried grocery bags, struggling with them. Without thinking, I got out of my car. "Let me help you," I said, walking toward her. She smiled, a grateful, open smile. "Oh, thank you. These wine bottles are heavier than I thought." She handed me a bag. Our eyes met. Up close, I saw the fine lines around her eyes, the kindness in her face. There was no guile there. She didn't know who I was. "New around here?" she asked pleasantly, fumbling for her keys. "Just visiting," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's a beautiful house." "Thank you. We love it. My husband designed most of it." My husband. The words were a physical blow. "He's not with us anymore. Recently." I handed her the bag, my fingers brushing hers. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Her eyes welled with genuine tears. "Thank you. It's been a nightmare for me and our son." She blinked them back, smiled again. "Well, thanks again for the help." "Of course." I walked back to my car, my legs weak. She thought she was a widow. She believed in her marriage as fully as I had believed in mine. We were both his ghosts. The confrontation, when it came, was not of my choosing. Eleanor had begun the legal process of freezing accounts and asserting my claim over the diverted assets. Letters went out. Miranda Vale, through a lawyer of her own, responded. She was the rightful beneficiary of Jonathan's life insurance policy, a $2 million policy I knew nothing about. She was also named the sole inheritor of the Seacliff house and its contents in a will he executed 5 years ago, separate from the one that left our family home and remaining assets to me and Chloe. A meeting was arranged. A mediation. Eleanor and I sat on one side of a conference table. Miranda and her lawyer, a young, aggressive man, sat on the other. Miranda looked shattered, her earlier warmth replaced by a hollowed-out fear. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw the dawning horror in her eyes. She finally knew. My client, her lawyer began, was in a committed marital relationship with Mr. Pierce for 7 years. They share a child. She is entitled to the assets he intended for her support. Eleanor's voice was cool. My client was in a legal marriage with Mr. Pierce for 25 years. All assets acquired during that marriage, including the funds used to purchase the Seacliff property and finance its upkeep, are communal property, fraudulently diverted. Mrs. Pierce never consented to this second household. She is the wronged party here. Miranda spoke then, her voice trembling but clear. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know about you. He told me he was divorced. He said his ex-wife was bitter, that she'd moved to Europe. He had a whole story. She looked directly at me, her eyes pleading. I loved him. We had a life, a son. He's just lost his father. Please. Her pain was real. It mirrored my own, but it didn't cancel mine out. It multiplied it. What did he tell you he did for a living? I asked, my own voice quiet. He was a financial consultant. He traveled sometimes for work, to see clients. The echo of his lie, reflected in her truth, hung in the air. Every Friday? I asked. She flinched. Yes, how did you? That was when he came home to me. The silence in the room was absolute. The 2 lawyers looked down at their papers, unwilling witnesses to the mutual destruction. Miranda's lawyer cleared his throat. Regardless of the personal dynamics, we have a valid will, a named beneficiary on the insurance policy, and a minor child to support. We will fight for our share. Eleanor smiled thinly. And we will fight to have that will invalidated due to undue influence and fraud, and to recoup every cent of marital funds used to perpetuate this deception. This will be long, ugly, and public. Your son's paternity will be part of the court record. Is that what you want? Miranda put her head in her hands. It was an utter gesture of defeat. I felt no triumph, only a deep, weary sadness. The legal battle became a war of attrition. The press got wind of it. Prominent lawyers' double life exposed. Seacliff secret family. Chloe raged, then retreated into a cold fury. My relationship with my daughter became a minefield of unspoken pain. She blamed her father, but she also, somehow, blamed me for not seeing it, for not being the woman he wanted to come home to on Fridays. I opened the letter from the safe deposit box. It was worse than I imagined. Catherine, if you are reading this, I have failed to make things right, and you have found the box. There is no justification, only explanation. I met Miranda 6 months after your mother died. You were so lost in your grief, a continent away from me. She was a light in a very dark time. It started as a friendship. It became a life I never meant to build. The boy, Leo, is my son. I love him. That love does not diminish what I felt for you and Chloe, but I know you will never believe that. I provided for them with the only tools I had, money and lies. I intended to tell you, to find a way to unwind it, but the years passed, and the lie became a structure too complex to dismantle without destroying everything. I am a coward. I have betrayed you in the most fundamental way. The life insurance policy, the will, it was my attempt to provide for my son after the mess I made. The money in the box is for you, a small, insufficient apology. Use it to start over. I am so sorry. Jonathan. A small, insufficient apology. $120,000 for 25 years and a shattered universe. I burned the letter in the kitchen sink, watching the edges curl and blacken, his elegant script turning to ash. The climax came not in court, but in a quiet room at children's services. Leo, the boy, our son's half-brother, had been struggling, acting out at school. Miranda was at her wits' end, drowning in legal bills and grief. Her lawyer reached out to Eleanor. A truce was proposed, a private settlement. We met again, this time without the lawyers in the room, just Miranda, Leo, and me. Chloe refused to come. Leo was tall, lanky, all elbows and knees, and Jonathan's penetrating gaze. He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. "You're the other one," he said bluntly. "Leo," Miranda hissed. "It's okay, I am. He said you were crazy, that he hated you." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "He lied to you, too. I didn't hate him. I didn't know you existed." The boy's bravado faltered. "He loved us." "I believe he did," I said, and it was the truth. But he loved in a broken way. He thought he could split himself in two and make two whole families. He was wrong. He hurt everyone.
Miranda was crying softly. "What do we do? I can't fight anymore. I just want Leo to be okay." I looked at this woman who was not my enemy, but my fellow casualty. I looked at this boy who was an innocent piece of the man I loved and hated. The legal battle could go on for years, draining what resources were left, poisoning all our lives. "We stop fighting each other," I said slowly, the idea forming as I spoke. "We divide what's left. The Seacliff house is yours. It's your home. The life insurance, we split it, half for you and Leo's future, half to replenish the marital estate he drained." Miranda stared at me. "Why would you do that?" "Because he's already taken enough from both of us. I won't let him take my humanity too. And because he's right about one thing." I looked at Leo. The boy is innocent. The settlement was drafted. It was not what the law might have ultimately given me. It was less. But it was peace. It was a chance to stop living in the wreckage of Jonathan Pierce's choices. With the settlement funds, I paid off the remaining mortgage on my own house. I sold it. It was too full of ghosts. Chloe, still fragile, moved back to Boston, our relationship a work in slow, careful progress. I took the cash from the safe deposit box, the $120,000 blood money, and I did something Jonathan would never have understood. I bought a tiny, struggling cafe in a neighborhood far from the social registers and country clubs. I named it the Tuesday Cafe, a private joke, a reclaiming of the day that was always mine. It was hard, learning about commercial leases, about inventory, about baking scones that didn't turn to stone. But it was my world, my ledger books, my truth. One rainy afternoon, a woman sat in the corner nursing a coffee for hours, staring out the window with a familiar hollow look. I brought her a fresh cup, on the house. "Rough day?" I asked. She gave a brittle laugh. "Rough life. I just found out my husband of 20 years has a girlfriend, a serious one, an apartment." My heart clenched in solidarity. I sat down across from her. "I'm so sorry." She looked at me, really looked. "You sound like you mean it." "I do." I took a deep breath. "My husband had a whole other family, a son." Her eyes widened. The story tumbled out of me. Not the legalese, not the bitterness, but the human cost. The Friday meetings, the safe deposit box, the woman watering fuchsias, the boy with his father's eyes. Her own pain found a reflection in mine, and in that reflection it became less isolating. She came back the next week, and the week after. She brought a friend who was leaving a controlling marriage, then another. The Tuesday Cafe, by unspoken design, became a haven, a place where women could sit,
talk or sit in silence and not be judged. I never formally started a group, it just grew organically, like the resilient vine now climbing the trellis outside the window. One day, Miranda walked in. Leo was with her, taller now, holding a skateboard. They looked hesitant. The cafe fell quiet for a beat, my regulars sensing a shift. "Hi," Miranda said. "We were in the neighborhood. I wanted to see the place." I smiled, a real one. "Come in, what can I get you?" Over lattes, the conversation was stiff at first, then easier. Leo talked about school. Miranda was thinking of going back to school herself for graphic design. We didn't talk about Jonathan. We talked about the weather, the terrible city traffic, a new movie. It wasn't friendship, it was something rarer, a mutual, hard-won ceasefire, an acknowledgement that we were both survivors of the same shipwreck, washed up on different shores. It's been 3 years. The Tuesday Cafe turns a small, steady profit. Chloe calls every Sunday, and we're learning to talk about things that aren't the past. Sometimes Miranda and Leo come by. It's not easy, but it's real. This morning, I opened my own safe deposit box at a different bank. In it, I keep the updated deed to the cafe, my will leaving everything to Chloe and a trust for Leo's education, and a single worn gray key, the one that started it all, a reminder of the day I chose to stop being a ghost in my own life. The man who tried to divide his heart between 2 homes left both in ruins, but from those ruins I built a single, solid table. And at that table, I serve coffee and I listen, because sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is not to seek a grand revenge, but to rebuild a world where secrets hold no power and where her own name on the ledger is the only truth that matters. If you've ever had a Friday that turned out to be a lie, if you've ever held a key you didn't recognize, your story matters. Tell it in the comments below. You are not alone. And if you want to hear more stories of women finding their way through the wreckage, subscribe to the channel. Stay with me. There's strength in our side of the story.